that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I want to hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Finnell. I am George Harvey, and that's Tom Finnell. And just for those of you who don't know, I go to the news every morning. Today, I actually started at about 2:30, looking for news that I put at my blog, which is geoharvey.wordpress.com. And at the end of the week, I have a number of things gathered together. I put up about 10 to 15 items a day, and I take about 3 of them a day and put them on a site where Tom and I can work on them, and we bring them in and talk about them. So we're going to start.
That's what this is all about.
That's what this is all about. We're going to start last Thursday, November 27th, and we got this from the Energy Collective. September and October were the hottest months ever recorded. This is scary. This thing.
It's also repetitive.
Yeah, I know it is.
Every month they say the same thing.
Continuing the record-breaking streak that started in April and almost assuring that 2014 will be the warmest year ever. We actually have another item on this later.
Well, we've already been looking at this for the last 2 months.
Man.
And the only difference in these graphs here from the ones we've had is these graphs now are just water temperature.
Yeah, this says
there's a lot in this about the water temperature,
right,
and why not measuring it right is giving us some false impressions.
Yeah.
There's one thing that they talk about. There's a slight dip in the rise of global warming, and skeptics and deniers are saying, "See, it isn't happening."
Yeah, right.
You know, and these guys are saying, "Yeah, it's happening.
It's
We're
happening."
just measuring it wrong.
Well, what happened in the water? Canadian ocean temperatures for September, which are shown in NOAA images, approached 4 degrees Celsius above normal. That's about 7 degrees Fahrenheit. This is where the entire planet is headed.
On the right up there.
Yeah, I mean, 4 degrees Celsius, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. That's the difference between swimming in frigid feeling water and swimming in water that feels fine.
Yeah.
This is, and of course, that's one of the things that's scary about this is that it's not just one place. It's happening in the Pacific, it's happening in the Atlantic, and it's happening in Hudson's Bay.
Well, one thing that came to me out of this article, and I didn't realize, probably knew it all the time, but never realized it. More than half of the landmass in the world is above the equator.
Yeah.
So what's below the equator is mostly water.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem here, because there's nobody living down there, nobody's measuring the water.
Well, that's, it's science. This is how you deal with science. If you want to do it right, make sure you do it right. So, you have more on that, Tom, or should I go on?
Well, there's a lot in this thing. There's really a lot in this thing. And, we could probably spend the entire hour just talking about this.
We could spend the entire week talking about this.
What I'm going to say is if people who are interested in this, visit your blog. There's a link there. Click on the link.
Yes.
Get the whole story, because it's going to take you a couple hours to get it. GeoHarvey,
GeoHarvey.wordpress.com. And this is Thursday, November 27th. It's an item in there. And you can go there and find out all about it.
There's a couple of others in here that are really long, really informative, loaded with stuff. And we'd spend a week talking about it.
Yeah, so, well, they're spending, I think, 10 days talking about it in Lima, Peru right now.
Right now, as we speak. Well, the takeaway from this one here is they call this little slight dip in the rise of global warming the hiatus.
Yeah.
And this sentence says it all. When the hiatus ends, global warming looks set to be rapid.
Yes. And unfortunately, what we're seeing here is probably the end of that hiatus. The thing about this warm water is that it is coming up from below the surface.
Yeah.
And that's important to note because it means that the entire ocean floor in the world is warmer than it should be.
It's starting to get warmer.
Yeah, and 4 degrees Celsius is a lot. 4 degrees Celsius, take your house at 68 and add 4 degrees Celsius, and you might feel
75, right?
75, and you might feel uncomfortably warm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go on, even if you stay there.
Yeah, I got the next one coming
Okay.
up.
This looks like edie.net. It's EDIE. Scotland has broken renewable energy generation records, producing 10.3 terawatt hours of electricity. 10.3 terawatt hours is 1,300 gigawatt hours. Or
10,300.
Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. 10,300 or 10,300,000 megawatt hours. That's a lot of electricity.
It certainly is.
It
certainly is.
Yeah.
Scotland's not that big of a country.
That's right. In the first half of 2014, and this means that it's actually overtaken nuclear power as the main source of electricity. The
numbers are in the article. I just truncated the article, but you just mentioned 10.3 terawatts. Nuclear is presently generating 7.8 terawatts, so they're almost as much. Coal is 5.6, and gas is 1.4.
Right. And the Scots are, they're on their way to getting to 100% renewable by 2020.
They got a pretty good chance of achieving it.
Yeah.
And in this same article, here it is at the very bottom. In October, just a month ago, the Scottish government approved 500 more wind turbines spread across 4 offshore wind farms.
Yeah.
So they got a lot of water around them and are using it.
That's right. That is right. Okay, the next item comes from oilprice.com, a waste to biofuels plant. That is to say, you're starting with waste, you're ending up with biofuels.
Well, this is a great idea.
Yeah, operated by Enerchem in northern Canada, is the first in the world to transform solid waste into biofuels and chemicals. The waste is heated, converted to gas, changed to liquid methanol, which is then used in the production of local products, including everything from windshield wiper fluid to gasoline. And that is not really all that new technology.
Locally usable stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all technology.
We could do it right here.
We could.
We could. What is different about this is probably that they're coming up with a more efficient way of doing it. But this is...
They are, and it's the scale. It's a very large plant. Of course, it's Edmonton. It's a big town.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next day...
The plant will divert an astounding 90% of the city's garbage from landfills by 2016. 90%.
Well, we're talking about stuff that people throw away or flush down the toilet, and it's got dollar value.
That's the bottom line. People start to realize that.
Yeah.
This is a good sign.
It is. Okay, Friday, November 28th, from the Energy Collective, hard on the heels of last week's historic U.S.-China joint announcement on climate change, in which China pledged for the first time to cap its CO2 emissions by 2030, China's State Council has just announced a new energy strategy action plan that includes, for the first time, a cap on national coal consumption by 2020. And one of the things that struck me about this, Tom, is that whenever I read these things, I wonder whether they're going to start reducing the amount of coal they use long before the cap comes.
Yeah.
Because it just.
Well, this article, the article itself isn't skeptical, but it talks about skeptics who mention exactly this.
Yeah.
And the article goes on to say, not so. The Chinese have their backs against the wall as far as pollution is concerned.
Oh, that's what I mean.
Their own people are complaining big time.
Big time.
And they're listening.
Yeah, and they have to, because they can't hide. Air pollution is not something you can sweep under the rug.
That's a good statement. I like that.
I made it up. Yeah. Okay, from CNN, we get this. Oil prices came crashing down Thursday to trade below $70 a barrel. $70 a barrel after OPEC announced it was leaving oil production levels unchanged. The low price is bad news for certain oil-producing countries like Russia, Nigeria, and Venezuela, which depend on prices of at least $90 a barrel. While they last, lower oil prices could also halt the U.S. shale oil boom.
Well, that's a lot right there in that sentence.
It is.
It's a lot right
Absolutely
there
it
because
is.
with oil prices going down, it is not profitable to frack in many locations.
Yeah.
And it's just going to slow that thing down.
Yep.
I have another take on this thing. And,
Okay.
This is world-class political.
Okay.
Basically, I think the U.S. has sat down together with Saudi Arabia, who they've been in bed with since 1944,
Yes.
and they've said, we're trying to contain Russia.
Yeah.
Why don't we hit them where it hurts?
Absolutely. And if the U.S. isn't doing it, I could name several countries in Western Europe that would do it on their own. And you could go down a great long list of countries that they might go one after another to Saudi Arabia and say, I just had the greatest idea.
And the Saudis, this article mentions it in greater detail. They have so much cash sitting on the shelf, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They got the oil coming out, and if it stops coming or it slows down for us, so what? It's not going to affect the lifestyle of the rich and famous in Saudi Arabia.
I have a feeling that they, the question that I've got is how many cars can you drive at a time?
In Saudi?
Anywhere.
Oh, yeah. Well, in Saudi, they don't even allow the women to drive.
They don't allow them to. That doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't happen.
Well, that's
I have a friend. I have a friend who told me that I don't think it's Saudi Arabia. I think it's the UAE, but it's one of those areas.
They can drive in the UAE.
What they have is they've got something like an 8-lane wide highway, and it's a divided highway, and they close off one side of it at night.
Oh yeah.
And the traffic is confined to the other side, and they use that one side for racing.
Oh, that's interesting.
And this guy was put in the hospital, not my friend, but a friend of his, for something like 4 months because he hit a camel at 200 miles an hour.
Oh, that hurts.
I'll bet it does. Yeah, the camel probably didn't feel it, but he did. Okay.
I had a friend who used to work for the, whatever the leader of Oman was called. I think he was the Sultan.
Okay.
And not this guy, this Sultan who my friend was working for, but his father had the first car in the kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
And he had no roads to drive it on.
Yes.
So he had a super highway built specially for him that was like 2 miles long. It didn't go anywhere. So he could take his car out and drive.
Yeah. I read about somebody who wanted a solid gold Rolls Royce, and they talked him out of it. They said the gold would crack.
Probably
okay.
true.
From iGovernment, and this is a new one to me.
I is probably Indian, huh?
It might be. The Indian government has received proposals from 12 states for setting up solar power parks, ultra mega solar power projects with a total capacity of 22,100 megawatts. The biggest of these is to be a 7,500 megawatt park to be set up
That's big.
in Leh and Kargil of Jammu and Kashmir. They have hundreds of proposals. That's big.
Well, their rural electrification program is just beginning.
Yeah.
And a new guy that's been elected, part of his platform was, I'm going to give you guys electricity.
Right.
And he's not going to give them what we have.
That's
but
right.
He's going to give them far more than they ever had in the past.
Well, they didn't have any.
Bingo.
A third of the people in India don't have electrical power.
Well, they will within 10 years.
Well, he's saying they will within 3 years.
Within 3. Okay.
But what they're doing under that program, a lot of it is they're putting in solar panels and batteries, so people can have their own completely detached systems.
Yep.
And I did a little calculation on the number of people involved and the amount of PVs involved, and it turns out that what they're talking about is giving these household panels that are 45 watts on average.
Is that all?
Yeah,
Well,
just
they're not
45.
needing much.
But you know, the thing is,
A light bulb in the kitchen,
That's right. That's right.
television set.
Yeah, and a light bulb in the kitchen is a huge thing
Oh,
for people
absolutely.
who are accustomed to burning kerosene.
Oh, absolutely.
So that can be a big deal. But this,
Well, health-wise.
huh?
Health-wise.
Health-wise, absolutely. They don't have to breathe kerosene
Breathe that
fumes.
kerosene fumes.
This thing, what they're talking about is solar power parks. And what that means is they're designating huge areas of land to be reserved for solar power. And then different organizations can come in and develop sizable chunks of that land. So the hundreds of proposals they've got are for smaller. This is not a 7,500 megawatt installation.
Like we just saw.
Yeah, it could be 75, 100 megawatt installations. It's going to be a mix of sizes, though.
That's
Very
a great
big
thing
deal.
for India. I think
Yeah,
it is.
It is.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Going to bring them into the 22nd century.
Yeah, right. They'll wind up being ahead of the United States if we don't watch out. Okay, from Forbes on Saturday, November 29th, we got this. This is an opinion piece. The title is A New Climate? ? How a utility, Germany, Elon Musk, and falling oil prices are conspiring to fight CO2. By piecing together a series of seemingly unrelated threads, there's a case to be made that 2014 will be remembered as a critical year for decarbonization of the global economy. Sound unbelievable? Try these stories and see.
And I got the stories. I'll mention them in a second. But this is one of those long, informative articles
Yes.
that we could spend a week talking about.
Yes.
But the information is there, and it's there for a click. So you guys out there looking at it, this is one of them worth looking up.
Yeah.
But these are the eight pieces together, seemingly unrelated threads. And it makes sense. First one is oil prices are collapsing. We just talked about
We
it.
just talked about it.
Second was the era of the carbon tax may have arrived. Now, that's something that's been floating around the United States, Europe,
Especially in Vermont.
Canada, Vermont.
Yeah, but it's
And
already going in British
It
Columbia.
is starting to happen.
Mhm.
And depending upon its success, it may take over. So it's still an unknown,
Right.
but it could be a very big part of it. The China syndrome is what they call it.
Wow.
And I mentioned this in the previous one. The air pollution there is already so severe, they're quite literally killing themselves. It's almost impossible to believe they won't live up to the accord that they signed.
Right.
Because it's a matter of life and death
Yeah, to them.
to them. And the second is because of China's command economy. It's not strictly a market economy like ours. The guys on the top still have the power to say, you will do this. Because of command economy, it can achieve successes at a greater rate than the market will in many cases. Okay? The next one is renewables are becoming cheaper than coal, gas, and everything else.
Yes.
All of these add up.
Yeah.
The next one, and this one I didn't follow up too much, but it's a lone wolf howls in agreement, and they give the example of a guy named David Crane, who's the maverick of a large electrical utility called NRG.
Yes.
And he's announcing this company will cut its carbon emissions 90%.
90% by 2050.
And this guy's doing it for economic reasons.
Yes.
Well, he might have
And we're going to see more on that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
So the next one that they talk about is the German experiment, which we've talked about at length, the energy Wende,
Yep.
which is very successful.
Yes.
The next one is, and this is what the headline says, speaking of and to the Germans, Tesla's Elon Musk has spoken to BMW about collaborating on battery and charging technology. And they elaborate on that. They
Yeah.
say, you know, if he succeeds, he's going into it big time.
Yes.
He's
Well-
already started going into it big time here.
Yeah.
He's going to go into it big time in Europe.
Yep.
And finally, and this is the interesting one, if anyone...
The interesting one.
the most interesting one.
The most interesting.
It's talking about Elon Musk and electric cars versus gasoline cars.
Yep.
This next one says, if anyone is driving those cars, that is.
Yeah, well,
And
there you go.
he talks about a macro trend, a large-scale change in the way people go about things, and he explained that this seems to be happening. Young people aren't driving cars, or they're
Yes.
not owning cars
Yes.
in this country.
Yes. Everybody who's watching this show should think about this. If you commute, if you go to the store, if whatever, and that commutation at store or whatever can be done in using some means other than going by car.
Yep.
Okay. If you could cut out the car, you're going to add $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a year effectively to your income.
This is true.
So
the number is accurate.
You know, I mean, the idea of owning a car, you really have to kind of justify it.
Well, it's been a love affair.
Yeah, and it's
And
been
the
a
love
love
affair
affair.
may be over.
Maybe over. Well, you know, believe it or not, you might not believe it to look at me, but that's something I know about.
Yeah, you don't own a car anymore, right?
I don't have a love affair either. Yeah, okay. So,
More on China and coal.
more on China and coal. China use in coal could peak earlier than China use in coal. Coal use in China could peak earlier than previously forecast as slowing economic growth cuts power demand and the government clamps down on energy-intensive industries to meet its emissions reduction goals. The Natural Resources Defense Council predicts that coal use will peak before 2020, cutting years off earlier forecasts. This is from the Hellenic Shipping News Worldwide.
You get some doozies, don't you? It's still a good article.
It is, actually. And yeah, you'd be amazed at the number of publications I look at every day.
I am amazed. I mean, I know some of them, you know. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, some of them I'm scratching my head. Where did he find this one?
Like the Hellenic Shipping News Worldwide. That's actually not the first time I've taken an article
It's
out of
not,
that.
huh?
No.
No. This next one coming up, I'll let you start into it.
Okay. From the Daily Mail, the world's largest solar power plant has gone online in California with enough power to supply 160,000 homes, spanning a huge 9.5 square miles, a third of the size of Manhattan. The Topaz solar farm consists of 9 million solar panels and a capacity of 550 megawatts. The cost...
It's about the size of Yankee, isn't it?
Actually that's less than Yankee is producing right now.
Is it?
Yeah,
Not by much.
Not by much. I'm sorry, it's more than Yankee is producing right now because
Okay,
Yankee
'cause
has
they've
has
gone back
cut
down.
back. They're at 80% today, but 550 megawatts of solar. It's not fair to compare it to 550 megawatts of
we're
nuclear.
talking peak value here.
Yeah, peak value.
But still, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
And as one thing about this article was loaded with pictures, and I saved
Yes.
some of the pictures.
Oh, good
that
for
are
you.
up there. This is a very large solar array.
Yes.
Well, as it says, it's half the size of Manhattan.
Yeah. A third
This
of the
is
size.
large.
Yeah.
There's a picture down there in the lower left as to where it is being located. And it's about halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco on the west coast.
Really?
And what surprises me is it's desert.
Well, it's
There's
desert.
a lot of desert in Southern California.
There's
but
a lot
I
of
didn't think
desert.
It was so much close to the sea,
I wonder what happens when it starts raining there.
which is about once every 2 years.
Well, it hasn't been much in the last couple of years, but somebody was telling me that they were hit with
Yeah,
5
the
inches of
one
rain
slide
yesterday or
The
something.
rain is coming down too much.
That's what happens with climate
Yeah,
change, you know.
yeah.
Okay.
It's an interesting article, if not just for the pictures.
Well, there you go. Okay, Sunday, November 30th. The largest pension funds manager in Norway, and this is KLP, is divesting completely from coal energy. The money involved, around $75 million, will instead be invested into renewable energy companies. With assets of around $84 billion, KLP is the second in the world only to Norway's state-owned oil revenue fund in regard to investment clout.
Well, this is an interesting story here because this is not so much about energy as it is about investment.
Yes.
because Norway provides almost all of its energy from hydro.
Right.
So the stuff that the Norwegians are using is all hydro.
Yeah. But
So
they
this
made
company is an investment company.
right. They have made scads of money in oil fields off
Definitely,
their coast.
Definitely. This is a beautiful example of a welfare state. 'Cause
Yeah.
the Norwegians are all fat and happy. 'Cause
Well,
they're
not
getting
all
money
fat.
from that.
I've known a few who are Norwegian. They weren't
They're
fat.
skinny. They're happy though.
They're happy. You might say they're in good shape.
This is an interesting thing because until this decision, this KLP company had been an investor in 20 or 30 coal companies worldwide, which include the American companies Peabody Energy and Consolidation Coal,
Yeah.
and also Coal India, Shugang Fushan Ray, wherever that
could've-
might be,
Yeah.
and China Coal Energy Company Limited. So they're getting out of the coal business
Right.
just from a standpoint of investment.
Right.
And they might be doing it from the goodness of their hearts, but I bet you they're doing it from the fatness of their wallets.
I think it's probably a combination of both.
A little bit of both.
Yeah, the Norwegians have been very into the question of climate change and what to do about it. And so, you know, the other fund, Norway's state-owned oil revenue fund, has also been reducing its fossil fuel holdings. So
I mean, other than what they're drilling.
I don't know that they're drilling at all anymore, to tell you the truth.
They're just
They
sucking
have,
the oil out.
yeah, they have been selling the. What happened there was that the Norwegians found that they had these huge oil fields, and unlike the United States, where they say we're going to lease this to you and you can do whatever you want with it, and then the oil companies go in and pump the oil out, and then they say, hey, we've run out of oil,
Yeah.
and they collect money because they've run out of oil. In Norway, what they did was they had a state-owned oil fund, state-owned oil business, and the profits from that business went into a fund which is used as a retirement fund for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the largest retirement fund in the world. At least that's my understanding. I could be a little bit off on that, but that is my understanding.
And I think they market here in the U.S. as Statoil. I think that's Norwegian.
Yeah,
Statoil.
stat meaning state.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I mean, it's a regular filling station.
yeah,
You know, you buy,
Yeah.
fill up
Yeah.
your car there.
yep, yep.
But this next one's kind of interesting.
That, and by the way, the one we just read and this next one both are from Clean Technica.
Good source.
Yeah, it's a very good source. Energy suppliers in remote areas are turning to renewable powered microgrids like those on islands.
It's a nice looking island.
Yeah, isn't it? They can operate independently or in conjunction with the area's main electric grid. By being able to produce electricity on site, distributed solar and wind systems reduce utility infrastructure requirements, cutting the cost of rural electrification.
They don't need the grid.
They don't need the grid.
Yep.
And if they're remote and they have 3 little communities there, they can have different resources and the communities can be tied into a larger grid, but it's still just the 3 little communities. And you
Yep.
don't need thousands of miles of electric lines to keep these people going. And this is one of the things that distributed power is all about.
Interesting takeaway from this article. With over 1.3 billion people in the world still without electricity, that's a quarter of the world.
Yeah,
They still don't have power.
they still don't have electrical power, yeah.
That's hard to wrap your mind around.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it is. You know, we've talked about the island off Scotland called Egg.
Yep.
And that one, they had electric power.
Yeah, they had a diesel powered.
But it only ran a certain number of hours a day.
Yeah, right. Now they got it all day long, all night long.
And the reason is because they put up wind turbines
Yep, and batteries.
and batteries, and the diesel was kept in case there was
Just
a
in
need
case,
for it.
yeah.
Yeah. But you know, here are people who are in what is an advanced country. You know, Scotland is not the boondocks. Well, it is sort of the boondocks, but you know, just from different points of view. I mean, this is a country which is, I think, the second largest contributor, or maybe the third, after the United States and possibly the Soviet Union, to but certainly over a period of time during the 19th century and the early 20th century, Scotland and the United States were the two countries that produced a lot of scientists, a lot of inventions, a lot of discoveries. And with that kind of technological advancement, you'd think that, yeah, everybody's got electric power, but it ain't so.
Well, in Scotland, it's the geography. I mean, we're talking
indeed.
about the islands. the
Absolutely.
Hebrides. And there's, what, 1,000 islands up there at least?
I don't know.
There's many.
Yeah, it's a lot of them.
A lot of
And in
islands.
some cases,
it's hard to
they've
connect islands with long-distance transmission
right.
lines.
And in fact, although, you know, now they're getting to a point where it's getting easier because there's a reason to put those transmission lines there other than the fact that you've got 45 people on the island. You know, now it's 45 people and 147 wind turbines.
The power is flowing both ways now.
Right. Okay, our next item, this is Monday, December 1st, and this refers to something.
This is Eon. You were talking about Eon.
Yeah, this is something that happened on the 30th of November, and I will tell you, I think it is one of the biggest, you could call it the biggest story of the year. Eon, which is E.on, or it's probably pronounced Aeon in German. Eon SE, Germany's largest utility, will break up, spinning off fossil fuel power plants into a separate company so it can focus on renewable energy. Eon will also announced it will write down the value of assets by 4.5 billion euros, which is about
$5.5 billion.
Yeah, leading to a substantial full-year loss. Even so, the shares had the largest jump in the last 2 years on the plan. The stock went up 6% because they said they're going to get rid of their.
The financial people are well aware of what they're doing.
Oh yeah,
they like it.
They're getting rid of all of their traditional energy sources and focusing on renewable power. This is the largest investor-owned utility in the world. It has an income that is well in excess of $100 billion a year. And they're getting rid, basically they're divesting of fossil fuels and nuclear, both.
Yep.
And I think that is a voice in the argument about what the future is going to be.
Well, as we've already spoken of, there's two schools of thought out there in the utility industry, and one is business as usual, and the other one is adapt.
Right.
And these guys are adapting.
They're
ahead of the curve.
Yeah. I think maybe they looked at Green Mountain Power and picked up a few.
Well, we'll be talking a little bit about Green Mountain Power later. They got a nice award.
Yeah, they did. They did indeed. The next item, we could spend all day on that item, but the next item, because we have to go on a little bit, is from Renew Economy. And that says, West Australian Energy Minister Mike Nahan has instructed the state-owned utility Horizon Power to investigate renewables-based microgrids as a means of providing cheaper and more reliable power to regional areas.
There's a picture up there. I'm not quite sure what it is.
I can tell you what it is.
Power.
Nahan has been a fierce critic of renewables in the past, but says the stretched-out grid is too expensive and unreliable. Now, that orange thing on the screen there is a map of part of Western Australia.
I guess it's Horizon Power.
I would think that it is. And if you notice, you'll see that there's a funny-looking thing that
looks
sticks
like a
out.
foot.
Yeah, sticks out on the side from that. And that thing exists because they had to put power plants out there to support people living out in the desert. And I think basically what this comes down to is that the price of power that is charged to everybody because they have to provide power to people who are very remote is very high. And
more so in Australia, definitely by a large factor than it is in the U.S.
Absolutely.
Just because of the population density compared to the total size of the country.
Right. They have about 1/10 of the number of people in an area about the same size.
About the same size as
so
US, Alaska.
Yeah, and the vast, overwhelming part of that huge country of Australia is desert and grasslands where people kind of live on cattle stations and things like that. And supplying power to those people has always been it's always been a problem.
Well, they followed the traditional model that was basically formulated here.
Yes.
And that was the way you did things. You know, look at how successful they are in the U.S. We're going to do it too.
Yeah, but
But they didn't take into account how sparsely spread out their population is.
There's another thing that they didn't take into account too, and that is in the United States, much of the power installation that we have was put there because people needed jobs in the 1930s.
Well, that's true too. I mean, it was a two-edged sword there.
Yeah.
They needed power and they needed jobs.
Right. And so,
Roosevelt put the two together, and it was a good move.
Right. The house that my grandparents had in Winchester, New Hampshire.
Just the one on top of the hill?
Yeah. that house got its electricity because of that rural electrification program. And prior to that, it was kerosene lamps and it was pretty primitive. When I was a kid, the kerosene lamps were still there. They just weren't used. Every room had two sconces.
We had a summer house that didn't have electricity, so we had kerosene lamps and a belly stove.
Yep, this was a summer house for my grandparents.
Yeah.
And my parents made it into a year-round place.
Yeah.
Very comfortable year-round place. But anyway. Okay, the next item that we have is kind of an interesting one. National Grid has filed comments on the EPA's Clean Energy Power Plan and issued a statement supporting the proposed regulations, which aim to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from existing power plants. National Grid US President Tom King says expanding access to energy efficiency was an especially exciting axis of the plan. This from Penn Energy.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
this National Grid, I'll explain who they are.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
They came about in England when England denationalized their power. At one time, the government supplied all of the power.
Was this Margaret Thatcher who did that?
I think it was, because it was about her era, so I think it was.
Yeah.
But it was happening in America at about the same time. Things like this were happening.
Yep.
So National Grid popped up. They don't run all of the power in England now, but they run a significant part of it.
Okay.
Now, basically, they're an investment company.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been investing in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So they bought Niagara Mohawk, or at least a significant amount of Niagara Mohawk over in New York, which is a large utility.
Mm-hmm.
NYMO was pretty big. They have bought some smaller power companies in Massachusetts.
And Rhode Island.
And Rhode Island, yes, absolutely. And they also do contracting for other utilities. So they got crews. So you might see a National Grid truck running around Brattleboro.
Wow. They
might be doing some kind of contract work for Green Mountain Power.
Wow.
Or for a private entity. But I have seen their trucks running around. But in any case, they're not one of the big guys in the U.S. yet. But it's very interesting that they're coming out in support of basically a green policy.
I think there's a number of other utilities that are doing that too.
Well, it's true that there are. As I said earlier, there's two groups out there. One is business as usual, and the other one is innovative.
Right.
And it remains to be seen which one wins. I mean, my money's on the renewable guys.
I don't think it remains to be seen. It remains to be seen which one has won in the past tense, but we know which one is going to win.
In the long run, I think, we know which one.
Yeah.
So there's National Grid up
now,
there.
National Grid, by the way, also increased the price of its power for the customers that it had in Massachusetts by 37%.
I remember we talked about that. What's the reasoning behind that?
Because they don't have enough natural gas, and that's because of the natural gas lines.
Because they got caught in a bind last winter.
Right, and the natural gas lines are not big enough to supply all the demand in eastern parts of New England. Mm-hmm. Fortunately for people in Vermont, we don't. Although natural gas is one of our bigger generating things in Vermont, that's
not really
in the Burlington area. There's a significant amount of
Burlington
natural gas.
Electric can use natural gas, but they
Right.
use wood.
It is for Vermont generated, if you're not going to consider Vermont Yankee,
Yeah.
natural gas has a significant percentage
Well,
of
I
it.
guess a lot of the smaller utilities are using
Yeah,
gas.
but still, it's not all that significant for Vermont electricity as a whole.
Yeah.
Because most of our
Most of it comes
electricity
from
comes
hydro.
from hydro and from out of state. And so we're not affected by this natural gas problem because that's areas like Boston and Providence and so forth. But they've had big increases. And in fact, one utility in New Hampshire, I understand, has had a 100% increase. But
They doubled the power?
they doubled the
Wow.
price. They had an extremely low price.
Okay.
And they've brought it up to a price that's approximately equal to what you find in Vermont, which is not all that high compared to what's happening in some other places.
No,
in-
we got fair price power.
Yeah.
It's not the cheapest, but it's
not the
far
cheapest.
from the most expensive.
Well, compare it with Hawaii. Anyway,
They're a special case.
yeah, they are. We're back to the islands again. Next item is from Oliver Reports, and Oliver Reports is a blog. It's not really a big news thing, but
Well, we've talked about this before.
which is that
New offshore leases?
yeah, a competitive lease sale of 742,000 acres off the coast of Massachusetts, specifically off Martha's Vineyard, will be offered for commercial wind energy development on January 29th, 2015. In case anybody wants to bid on it, anybody in our audience.
Save your shekels. You only got about a month and a half.
That's right. According to the U.S. DOE's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the area could provide up to 5 gigawatts, enough electricity to power 1.4 million homes, or half the homes in Massachusetts. Now, that being the case, do we need more natural gas lines in Massachusetts? Maybe
Well,
not.
I don't think we do. But, as a matter of fact, I'm looking at this, and what do I know? I'm not a specialist in it, but I'm looking at this. By the time they get all of these new gas lines built that they're planning to take
Yep.
advantage of the fracked gas, there isn't going to be any more fracked gas.
I have a feeling that's right. You know, from what I've seen of what's going on in the fracking business. Okay. Next item, which is from Tuesday, December 2nd. The amount of electricity generated by U.S. utility-scale solar PV power plants is up more than 100% in 2014 over the same period in 2013, thanks to big projects, many of them highly productive, that have been coming online. A number of major utility factors have made this possible, including the steep decline in the price of PVs. This is from Breaking Energy.
I find this picture interesting because it's clearly a city, but it's still a large PV setup.
Yes.
And I wonder what city it is. It looks like the Washington Monument, but I doubt that's
I
Washington,
don't think that's
D.C.
Washington, D.C. I doubt.
But it's
very much.
interesting because not all of these things are being built in the desert.
Yes, that's true. And yeah, that is true. However, there is something to comment on here. And that is when the U.S. government tabulates the amount of PV, they've actually said that they expect us to finish this year with 1% of our electricity from PVs.
But they're only talking about utility scale.
Exactly. And when you consider that almost half of what's put in is not utility scale, and furthermore, even when you put that together, it doesn't account for all solar power because it doesn't account for solar thermal at all.
Okay.
So what we're looking at here is that the electric power and the power actually from solar is probably about 2%. It's much more than they say.
And there's another little twist on that is a lot of people are putting in solar hot water heaters.
That's right.
And that just means they're using less
electricity. Well, you know, between that and things like that, efficiency and so forth, we've got a declining, the utilities, you know, like Entergy, which is saying, well, we know how to make money with nuclear, coal, and gas, and we're just going to do that. The problem is they don't, because the whole thing is changing. They're losing customers.
Correct.
They're losing customers because of efficiency. They're losing customers because people and businesses are going into their own generating equipment, which produces power cheaper for them. solar is, your own solar is the cheapest way to get power in Vermont. And you can finance it 100% and have your bills go down instantly. So, here is this next one.
Earlier on, and I didn't say this, and one of the items that we've already talked about, there's
Yep.
a little takeaway. The cheapest power you can get is the power that you don't use.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. Okay, this next item is from CNN. Oil prices came crashing down. Wow, this sounds like a deja vu again. Thursday to trade below $70 a barrel after OPEC announced it was leaving oil production levels unchanged. The low price is bad news. Am I back to something I've already done? I have skipped a page backwards. That's why I had a deja vu again. Here we go. Now I'm back on track.
Climate funds for coal?
Climate funds for coal. Yes. By golly. Thank you so much, Tom. This is interesting. This comes from the Philadelphia Tribune. Sorry, gang. About $1 billion in loans, $1 billion in loans, under a UN initiative for poor countries to tackle global warming is going toward the construction of power plants that will be fired by coal.
Yeah.
Japan gave the money to help its companies, its very own companies, build 3 such plants in Indonesia, saying they burn coal more efficiently and are therefore greener than old coal plants.
Well, that's true, but they're still dirty.
Yeah, they're still dirty.
You know, it's very interesting that we talk about this one, because today I was listening to New Hampshire Public Radio this morning.
Yep.
And they were talking about basically this.
Yeah.
And they were saying, you know, this is very inappropriate. And there are now overtures being made by corporations that are in the solar business to these companies by saying, you know, forget about the coal, we'll help subsidize solar. So this is private entities, private enterprise come across to this program, this UN, this very same UN program, and saying you don't have to build coal plants. We'll help you build.
And you know, if you think about
wind and solar.
If you think about it, if you build an electric plant, a coal plant, you're probably going to expect it to run for 40 years.
I'd say 30 for sure.
Yeah. The average American coal plant is older than 40 years.
Yeah.
But during that 40 years, you've got no control whatever over the price of coal. You don't know where it's going to go. Historically, it's always been a cheap source of power. Mm-hmm. You put in solar, and once that solar is paid off in 8 years, there's no cost for fuel. There's no comparison between the two, especially when you consider that the solar is cheaper anyway. Well, buy yourself a frigging battery if you don't.
And the battery technology is getting greatly improved.
Absolutely. Yeah,
another 5 years, you're going to see batteries that we don't even recognize as batteries.
Well, I've been looking into a battery from a company called Imergy, which is in California. It's a vanadium flow battery. We talked about this.
Flow batteries. They intrigue me.
Yeah, they are recovering the vanadium. I think we had this on last week. They're recovering the vanadium from fly ash. It's very low cost. They don't have to purify it highly because of the technology that they've got. And they've got this beautiful battery, which costs about $300 a kilowatt hour, where a car battery might cost $100 a kilowatt hour. This thing would be $300, but you can run it down 100%, and their expected life is 12,000 cycles.
That's a few.
That's a few. That's like 30 years or something. Yeah. And you know, the material in it can be recycled, but the battery is big. We were talking, the size of batteries, 7 feet by 7 feet by 4 feet. That's a big battery. This is still, it's a 5 kilowatt battery, and it's 15 to 30 kilowatt hours. All right, so you've got a battery that would probably be sufficient for 3 or 4 houses.
Yeah.
But it's a big battery.
Yeah, so you put it in somebody's yard.
Yeah, absolutely. Find some rich person and have it, put it in their closet. Okay.
As long as we're talking about storage,
yeah,
I came across this link on one of the ones we've already talked about.
Yeah.
And I clicked on a link, and it's an aluminum company, using molten aluminum as battery.
Yes.
And what's particularly interesting about it is in the process of making aluminum, which is highly dependent upon electricity.
Right.
They take the aluminum oxide, the bauxite, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They melt it, so it's a liquid.
Yeah.
And then they use electrolysis,
Yeah.
which is why it uses so much electricity.
Yep.
To separate the oxide, the
Right.
oxygen, from the aluminum.
Yeah.
So the liquid aluminum goes to the bottom.
Yeah.
The oxygen floats to the top.
And goes
The
off.
sandy
the
stuff is in the middle.
Yes.
Lo and behold, you already have a battery. And
Oh
this
my gosh.
German aluminum company has just realized this, and they're saying, holy cow, we have this huge battery here. We can cut our costs significantly by buying power at night when it's cheap. And we can store it ourselves in our production process.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, this is, serendipity coming in,
Crazy. Yeah.
But
Well,
there's stuff like this happening all over the place. I mean, a year ago, probably nobody at this German company realized they were sitting on top of a giant battery.
well,
And now they're saying, holy cow, we got one. How can we use it?
how can we use a battery? Right. Okay. On we go.
Onward and on.
And upward. VTdigger.org. You know VT Digger?
Oh, yeah. The digger,
Says
the
Green Mountain Power is the world's first utility to become a certified B Corp or benefit corporation. The state's largest electric utility has joined nearly 24 other Vermont companies that have met a high standard for social and environmental consciousness, joining the ranks of such companies as Ben & Jerry's. And I got a chuckle out of the idea that it was the world's first utility to become a certified B Corp.
Yeah.
It's the first utility to become a Vermont certified B
Well,
Corp.
Vermont, I think, is the only state right now that has B Corp.
I think there are other states that may have
But
picked
they're
it up.
working on it.
They're
because
working
It's a
on
good
it.
idea.
Yeah.
It's an
But,
idea whose time has come.
This is, I just think that there's a little bit of a joke in this, but this is good. This is good.
Well, a B Corp isn't worried about just the bottom line.
That's right.
They
They
have
are
to
worried
worry
about the bottom line.
They got to stay in business.
Yep.
But they can do good with their money, and they don't have to worry about their stockholders screaming for their scalp.
Right. Okay. Now, yesterday, which is the last day we're covering because we're going to a slightly
Yeah.
different system here. Sun Common, a 2012 spin-off of the advocacy group VPIRG, which is the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, has made its 1,000th solar installation in Vermont. Sun Common regularly works with 100 other Vermont companies and says it has created 100 jobs in the state. It also says the solar installations it has done have saved customers $14 million.
So Sun Common is basically a contractor,
Yes.
and they install
Yeah.
solar systems.
Yep. But I believe they're a nonprofit.
They might be,
Yeah.
because VPIRG certainly is.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
this is good news.
It is. Next item from Clean Technica, Citigroup says the impact of the China-U.S. climate deal signed earlier this month could total $3.9 trillion. That is the loss of revenue for big oil and big coal over the next 15 years from joint undertaking on greenhouse gas emissions by the world's two biggest economies.
And this is Wall Street saying it.
Yep, Citigroup and analysts suggest that thermal coal is on a permanent decline. And by the way,
Well, it lasted.
yeah, by the way, the coalition candidates in Victoria lost in their election. So you can see that the coalition government in Australia is losing its grip. I'm mentioning it because
Well, they've
if
been
coal
out of
is
step with the population over there on a lot of things.
yeah, the coal is in a permanent decline. They're banking on coal.
Well, for historical reasons.
Yeah,
I mean, coal has been a big part of the Australian economy since there has been an Australian economy.
that's right. That's right. We have one last item, and that is from ecobusiness.com. 1 in 5 Australian households has installed domestic solar energy systems. Data released today by the Australian Bureau of Statistics shows. Solar Citizens National Director Claire O'Rourke said most of the households were on lower and middle incomes and that they were using solar as a way to reduce power costs.
And they're doing it on their own.
They're doing it on their own.
And it's happening here too, which is it
absolutely.
isn't falling into the statistics.
That's right.
Nobody's watching it.
Well,
One of these days,
I
somebody's
think-
going to add all of this stuff together, and it's going to prove
I
to be
think the
significant.
American Solar Energy Society is probably watching.
Watching it, yeah.
But you know, it's really hard to guess what the status of solar power in the United States is, because even an organization like that is going to have a lot of trouble getting an accurate set of statistics on it.
Well, there's some people that are totally off the grid.
A lot.
Nobody knows they're there.
Yeah.
I know several people that have totally off the grid houses.
Mm-hmm. And
They're not hooked up for backup or anything like that. They
Yeah.
are off the grid,
yeah.
and their lifestyle doesn't suffer.
Yes, that's true.
They got warm houses. They got
We
They got
could-
refrigeration.
We could take Nancy Ray Mallory as an example. She's the editor of
Yeah,
the
she's off the grid. Isn't
Green Energy Times. She is absolutely off the grid. And there's a reason why there's a couple of reasons why she's off the grid. She would, I think, have had a grid tie if it was economically feasible to do it. But, you know, if you buy a piece of property that doesn't have electric lines running by it close,
Yeah.
it
can be very expensive
really
to get
bad.
power.
And one of the problems she had was that it was going to cost almost as much to put in grid power with or without her solar system as it cost to put in the solar system and the batteries to back it up.
Mm-hmm.
And her solar system, I forget how much it is, but I think it might be, I forget how much it is, but it's far more than she needs. And she's got batteries far more than she needs, and she's got a lot of energy gain because of the placement of her windows in her house,
Mm-hmm.
and she's got an extremely efficient. She built the house, and the house is extremely efficient with a lot of insulation and so forth. And so she has problems in that house because it overheats in the winter, just by itself.
Such a problem
yeah.
we should have.
And she has a diesel generator so that if the
Just in case.
she has run the diesel generator, she told me, 3 times in the last 3 years, each just to test and make sure that it was actually working properly.
She probably should run it more frequently than that.
And you know, she talks about the charge in her battery bank, and she comes to the end of a day when it's cloudy and says that she's got 99% charge and complains that she would much rather have 100% charge because it's better for the batteries, you know. And but the cost of her solar system, which was put in years ago, was the same as the cost of bringing in grid electricity.
Okay.
And there are a lot of places
It was a good investment.
Yeah, there are a lot of places in Vermont where you can build a house, but you can't build a house unless you're willing to live off grid or spend a lot of money bringing in solar power.
Right in this part of the state.
Right in this
There's
part of the
even
state.
places like that right
Yeah.
in this part of the state.
Yeah. I have a very close friend who had a place in Guilford, has a place in Guilford, which I think it was 3 telephone poles would be needed to bring the power to that property.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And so the house wound up having solar because that was the cheapest way of doing it. And that's just down the road.
Yeah.
You know, that's in an area where BCTV is.
I wonder if 3 telephone poles would be the most economical way to get power to the house.
Well, 3 telephone poles is a good way to get backup power to the house.
Well, I'm saying as opposed to cable. Bury a cables.
Oh, yeah, well,
It'd be less
yeah.
expensive than 3 telephone
It might be
poles.
less expensive. I don't know how those things go, but yeah, buried cable might be less expensive. I don't know. But, you know, that's what it is. Tom, we've come, I think, basically to the end of our hour.
We must have started early.
We started about
Yeah,
it with
'cause
about
it looks like we got 2 minutes left. Yeah.
61 minutes, but we've got about 1 minute left. So I think we've got just enough time to say goodbye to everybody.
Pretty much. Pretty
Okay.
much. Well,
Do you want to say goodbye first, or should I?
well, you traditionally do, so I will.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Tom is a man of few words. I am a man of many words. That's the reason why we have
It
this.
works out okay.
Right. We will hope to get back to you next week. Have a good one. We spin and we toil, we work all day, sowing and reaping, we store goods away, so we can be dressed well on the day that we die.